Here, read this.
Woof.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to John Kay's bookshop in Edinburgh, where I've just got time before I open to tell you a little bit about some books I've been reading recently. Starting off with a Star Trek book. This is Open a Channel, A Woman's Trek by Nana Visitor, who played series regular Major Kira Nerys on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, you wouldn't know it to look at me, but I am actually a really huge Star Trek fan, in particular of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So I was intrigued to read this. I've read many Star Trek books, and there are many written by actors who appeared on the show. Actors have written novels based around characters they played sometimes, like Andrew Robinson on Deep Space Nine, who wrote a novel about his character, Garak, the Cardassian tailor. There are actors who have also written memoirs of their times of the show. This, to my knowledge, is the first time where an actor has written sort of a social history or social critique of the show. And this isn't just a memoir of Nana Visitor's time on Deep Space Nine, but she looks at the whole franchise. And she looks at it, as the title implies, through the lens of its women, how Star Trek has treated women, both real women, the women who worked on the show, and fictional women that they create. And on one hand, it's an all too familiar story of institutional sexism in show business, in Hollywood in particular. There are some really horrific stories, not least Visitor's own. But what made it interesting as a Star Trek fan, but also even just in the canon of, I guess, sort of Me Too era books, was that by focusing on Star Trek, you're looking at a show that has a reputation of being very progressive. There are the famous moments in Star Trek, like William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols' interracial kiss that was seen as this great watershed moment for progressive values. And to this day, people argue about whether or not that reputation is deserved, whether or not the sort of nice side of Star Trek really is overstated or not. And this book does a really, really good job, in my opinion, of squaring up to that reputation. Star Trek is created by Gene Roddenberry, a hippie in military uniform. And that's where the strange mix of social utopia and sort of World War II era military culture starts. And echoes from the 60s all the way through, well, maybe not to the newer series, but certainly to the series in the 90s. This book is a fantastic demonstration of how the kernel of an idea like that has led to a really, really messy story of progress, but also how the optics of certain things change. So it was news to me that the original series, with their notorious miniskirts, all the female crew members, despite the fact that they're meant to be on a military vessel, all wear sort of go-go girl miniskirts. And this is a fairly iconic part of Star Trek's sort of visual legacy, I guess. And you would assume, and I had always assumed, that was part of the producer's male gaze. That was just, well, that's how women appear on TV in the 60s. You'll be showing off as much flesh as we can get away with. Actually, it turns out that the miniskirts were pushed by one of the female actors, Grace Lee Whitney, who wanted to basically show off her legs. But more seriously, the miniskirt in the 60s was seen as this symbol of a female emancipation. Now, whether or not you could argue that is merely sexism internalized is another issue. But there are lots of examples of decisions where the truth is a bit more nuanced than it first appears. And I really like the way that Visitor writes about Star Trek as a whole. This is not a company book. A lot of books on Star Trek are. The only point at which I began to feel a bit more estranged from the author was towards the end, when she was talking about the new Trek shows. When it comes to the new Trek shows, she is sort of absolutely besotted, and she thinks basically that everything's moving in the right direction. I think that's more up for debate. Obviously, this is a recommendation that really goes out for Trek fans, but if you're interested in Hollywood history and social history and show business, I think you'll enjoy it too. I am going to write about this book for my Substack. I've nearly finished the piece on that. That's going to go out soon. If you haven't subscribed to my Substack, I write free book reviews of recent-ish books. I'll leave a link in the episode description box below. There's I think 4 or 5 up there already, and this will be the next one. Moving on from Star Trek to Starlings, this is The Starling by Stephen Moss. You may have seen these books before. Stephen Moss has written a series of biographies of birds. He's written the wren, the robin, the owl, and a couple of others that I can't remember off the top of my head. They're absolutely beautiful books. Rather stupidly, this is an ebook for me, but it was on offer on Google Books, so I bought it there. But I almost wish I'd just waited to find a nice secondhand copy, because the covers are beautiful, and inside they are densely packed with illustrations, art over the years of the bird in question. If you see these and you're into birds, or you have someone in your life that's into bird books, they're really lovely. So in terms of the biography itself, it is both a natural history of the starling, but also a cultural history, a look at how the starling has been represented in poetry, in folklore, and in other areas of cultural interest. So, for example, we get the story of Mozart and his starling. So Mozart's starling was thought to have inspired one of his piano concertos. Stephen Moss makes the point that actually there's reason to believe perhaps it worked the other way around. Mozart wrote his concerto, and then his starling came on the scene and started imitating it. One of the things that is so notable about the starling, as well as their amazing murmurations, which do get coverage here, of course, is their ability, mimicry. Their astonishing ability to mimic any sound that they're exposed to. There's some fantastic stories of starlings imitating barking dogs, wolf whistles from building sites, where they've landed some builders in it by wolf whistling at passers-by. They've brought football games to a halt because their impersonation of the umpire or the referee's whistle is so accurate. And probably the most memorable story that Stephen Moss recounts is during the Blitz, they caused panics by imitating the sound of falling bombs and sirens. And Moss gives the cultural history up to the modern day. So it's not just stories about Mozart and poetry, but their newfound social media fame. And there's one that I think there's a social media starling who imitates R2-D2 and very, very well. I saw a clip of it, and but Stephen Moss points out that the noises that were used for R2-D2 may have been inspired by starling sounds in the first place, so it might be a kind of loop of imitation. And it's very interesting on the natural history side of things. Stephen Moss gives an account of all of starling subspecies and how they've been studied. And again, it goes right up to sort of recent data, recent developments in starling populations. So, for example, during COVID in London, the lockdowns had a really deleterious effect on the pigeon population because we weren't around for the pigeons to feed off. Pigeon population declined, which meant that the peregrine falcons that live in London, and I think he says there are about 30 pairs, had to turn to other food sources. Obviously, the pigeon is one of the easiest sources of prey for a peregrine falcon. And so one of the ripple effects of lockdown was that starling populations actually did decline through predation for the first time in a while because peregrines had to look elsewhere for their food. And that's 30 pairs of peregrines. Yeah, but otherwise the starling population is fairly steady. In fact, it's notoriously successful if you go to America, where it's considered a pest. Now, the traditional story I've always been told is that an eccentric German immigrant by the name of Eugene Schieffelin introduced the starling disastrously to America because he was obsessed with the canon of Shakespeare and he wanted to bring every bird mentioned in Shakespeare to America. Stephen Moss points out, that debunks this story basically and says, first of all, he's not a foreigner, he's a native New Yorker. Second of all, the bardolatry aspect has been completely overstated and he was just trying to introduce birds because he was interested in birds. And there wasn't the same knowledge of sort of ecological impacts of bringing in foreign species. And so Eugene Schieffelin has been very much misserved, as has the starling itself, which is a beautiful bird, an extraordinary bird from its murmurations, which Stephen Moss does talk about. To be honest, he tries to explain, if you can picture a starling murmuration, how they don't crash into each other. He says this is one of the questions he is asked most as a naturalist. And he does give an explanation, but I think the explanation, which I won't spoil for you, it leaves it just as mysterious and kind of miraculous as before. It really is one of the most astonishing sights you can see of animals en masse. If you ever get a chance to see a starling murmuration, there's nothing quite like it. Anyway, I loved this little bird book. I thoroughly recommend the rest of the series to you. And yeah, that's the starling. So moving on, I have this book. Edinburgh, Our Storied Town. This is obviously an Edinburgh book. This is written by Donald Smith, who is founding director of the Scottish Storytelling Centre, which is just around the corner here on the Royal Mile. This was written for the 900th anniversary of Edinburgh becoming a royal borough, and it is the story of Edinburgh from its earliest history to now, told through the story of the storytellers belched up by this old volcanic town. And it's wonderful. I mean, I've read this basic story several times. There are lots of short histories of Edinburgh or histories of Edinburgh literature, but this is really, really well told. It's full of things I never knew before. It picks up on some really lovely patterns, like the dubious stories that are told about our stories, from Ossian, the Ossian hoax of James Macpherson, all the way through, Jekyll and Hyde rumours of who inspired the story. We've talked about that enough times on the channel. All the way up to, Harry Potter and the rumours of where J.K. Rowling wrote the book, but also which corners of Edinburgh inspired it, if any, all of that stuff. And I really enjoyed it. I actually met Donald at a book launch for this book in, I think it was in December, and he very kindly agreed to do a podcast, and it was a really unique podcast. We recorded it just last week, and for the first time, it was a sort of walking podcast. We went from the south side on South Bridge, if you know Edinburgh, on Drummond Street, where Drummond Street and South Bridge meet, and we did a little tour round to the Storytelling Centre, with Donald just pointing out all of the literary history on every corner that we went through. I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. I'm most relieved that the audio sounds okay, because it's the first time I've done anything like that. And I'm just putting some visuals together to help it look, make visual sense, because we are referring to sometimes quite granular aspects of the setting. But it's really cool. I really hope that people like it, because it's a new thing for me, and it meant that we got to talk about all sorts of Edinburgh writers, some of which I've done whole podcasts on, and others we've never touched. So look out for that, and I thoroughly recommend Donald's book, which is called Edinburgh, Our Storied Town. Next up, a little bit of humour. This is one of my heroes, Spike Milligan. This is the second volume of his war memoirs, which is called Rommel, Gunner Who. It's the second volume of Milligan's extensive war memoirs. One of my favourite book purchases recently was a box set of all of these. I think there's 6 or 7 of them altogether. The first one is the most well known. It's called Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall. I actually can't remember if I've read all of them cover to cover. Milligan has been anthologized, and he's also been collected in editions that are called things like the Essential Milligan or the Collected Milligan, and I've read various ones of those, and I think maybe somehow mistakenly assumed I'd read all of the war memoirs. I've definitely read Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall, and I've now just read this one. So this is an account of his time in the desert campaigns we're talking World War II here, obviously, and they're hilarious. They are puerile, extremely funny, bawdy books. One of the sort of pleasures of reading Milligan's war memoirs is trying to work out what's complete bullshit, what's totally true, and what's somewhere in between, jazzed up a little, in his own phrase. Just to give you a sense of what you're in for, I'll read this. This is his prologue. It's really an epigraph. So he quotes Thucydides. Of the events of war, I have not ventured to speak from any chance information, nor according to any notion of my own. I have described nothing but what I saw myself, or learned from others, of whom I made the most careful and particular inquiry. Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War. Underneath which, Spike Milligan has, I've just jazzed mine up a little. Milligan, World War II. And the war is really just sort of a background noise for carping around, playing music, and chasing girls. To give you a sense of the energy and the humour, here's a scene where I think they've rocked up in a bar somewhere and are checking out the local talent. There, apart from the booze, was a barmaid whose bulging bosoms floated along the top of the bar with never less than 100 pairs of eyes to help them on their way. Many hot-blooded gunners ruptured themselves just staring. Try only looking at one at a time, I advised them. And it doesn't really let up being like that. There are a few reflective moments. I was surprised. I can't remember if this happens in the Adolf Hitler book, but as in the first volume of his memoirs. But there is one moment where he kind of flashes forward to the 70s, and there is as close to it gets to a kind of melancholy reflection on the time in the war, and the fact that some of these war memories are the best memories that these young men had. They had the silliness of youth went straight to the war, and that's what the memoirs are really good at demonstrating. That these are men in their late teens and 20s who are subject to all of the lust and absurdity of young men in their teens and 20s, but they just happen to be doing all of that section of their life in the desert. So anyway, that's Spike Milligan, and I realise I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to be quick on this one. But it's another funny book. It's another humorist. It's The Best of Dorothy Parker, which I read the other day. Loved it. I love Dorothy Parker. She's hilarious. You should definitely read Dorothy Parker. This is poetry and short stories. So if I have one quibble with the book, it's the title, The Best of Dorothy Parker. Her sort of legendary wisecracks aren't very well represented here, because most of those are found in essays, non-fiction, reviews, conversation. There's a little bit of that in the introduction, where one of her great moments is quoted. She had such a reputation for wisecracks. She was apparently challenged to do something funny with the word horticulture, to which her response was, "You can lead a horticulture, but you cannot make her think." But to give you a sense of the bulk of this collection, I will leave you with a poem from Dorothy Parker called Love Song. My own dear love, he is strong and bold, and he cares not what comes after. His words ring sweet as a chime of gold, and his eyes are lit with laughter. He is jubilant as a flag unfurled. Oh, a girl, she'd not forget him. My own dear love, he is all my world, and I wish I'd never met him. My love, he's mad, and my love, he's fleet, and a wild young wood thing bore him. The days are fair to his roaming feet, and the skies are sunlit for him. As sharply sweet to my heart he seems as the fragrance of acacia. My own dear love, he is all my dreams, and I wish he were in Asia. My love runs by like a day in June, and he makes no friends of sorrows. He'll tread his galloping rigadoon in the pathway of the morrows. He'll live his days where the sunbeams start, nor could storm or wind uproot him. My own dear love, he is all my heart, and I wish somebody'd shoot him.